Welcome back, everybody, to Day 3 of EA Global Summit, virtual conference connecting global EA practitioners. This is Juhi again from Summit team. We are extremely delighted to bring all EA practitioners to a single stage. Thanks all for showing fabulous participation in this conference. We are having exciting and informative sessions from other speakers in the next 2 days too. Whereas we also have sophisticated collaboration platform to give you all the best experience of attending this conference. For this session, we have Doug, founder and CTO of Parallel Agile, presenting here Agile Project Management with EA from sprint plans to Kanban boards to Jira tickets. Just to bring your attention once again, we also have the Teams channel ready and set up for you to connect and interact with Doug and other practitioners after this session and throughout this summit too. Please refer to the chat window to find the link. Please all your questions for this session to the Teams channel shared in your chat window. Doug will be answering few questions in the Q&A session at the end, but you can continue a detailed discussion post the session in the Teams channel. Now over to you, Doug. You can now present your session and share your screen, and I'll make you as a presenter now.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. So, are you seeing my screen now?
You're a presenter now, and we are yet to see your screen.
You are able to see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, what do I have to do to? Oh, I think I'd have to hit that. How about that? Can you see it now?
Not yet from my end. Presenter has control.
Juhi, this is Asher. So I can see the screen now.
Oh, okay, then that's good. That's good then.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me here. Really appreciate the opportunity. This morning's talk is on basically Agile Project Management with sprint planning. I thought I'd start and in the immortal words of Austin Powers, allow myself to introduce myself. So if nothing else, I've been working in this field for a long time. I started Iconics back in 1984. That's more than a decade before UML existed. Three of my co-authors are mentioned on this slide: Barry Beam, Chuck Suschek, and Matt Stevens. I met Barry back in 1986. Met Chuck somewhere around 2000. Met Matt in 2002. And in between, I've managed to produce a few books and a couple of tutorials. Enterprise Architect for Power Users was around 2005. So what we're going to talk about today is basically the highlights from Chapter 5 of the Parallel Agile book, which got published a few months ago. Barry, who's one of the co-authors on this book, also wrote a book called Balancing Agility and Discipline. And one of the premises of his book is that you can, and Barry basically invented the science of software cost estimation quite a long time ago. And he likes to plot things in terms of dollars spent. And the slide or the graph that you're looking at here is one of his graphs that basically shows the cost of being feedback driven versus plan driven. So essentially, if you want to boil this down to a couple of sentences, they're there at the top. Under planning is expensive and over planning is expensive. Somewhere in the middle is a cost minimum, and that's what we're shooting at with Parallel Agile. And the way we approached it in the Parallel Agile book is to adopt the Agile project management paradigm, but keep the UML-based design, and in fact augment that with code generation, which I'll be talking about tomorrow. So Barry also wrote a book called the incremental commitment spiral model. And the spiral model basically says that you proceed in phases and you have little checkpoints or gateways as you go around this spiral that says, I have to pass some criteria before I can move on to the next phase. So ICSM is kind of complicated if you try and read it. It's not really the simplest thing to absorb. So I'm a simple-minded guy, so I kind of simplified it for what we're doing with Parallel Agile. And essentially, you can think of software development as first you do a proof of concept, then you design a minimum viable product, and then you optimize it. And you can optimize it as many times as you need to, depending on how complex your system is. What we've been working with our test projects is a timeline of about 1 month for each of these phases. And we use code generation to enable large teams to work together by generating an API for database access from a UML domain model. Not going to talk too much about the code generation today because that's my talk for tomorrow, but you can essentially think of the Parallel Agile lifecycle as code first, design later. That's maybe unintuitive coming from me who's written 8 books on UML design, but the code first is really prototyping. And we help the prototyping go faster by generating a whole bunch of code at the beginning of the project. So what we found is that this enables large teams to work in parallel, and that if you have a project that's of, I'd say, small to medium complexity, you can actually go from 0 to a completed product in about 3 months, depending on how many developers you have available. More complex projects need more optimization sprints. They're again going to go around 1 month per sprint. So I started researching this somewhat by accident. Barry teaches at USC, and for some years he would invite me in to give a guest lecture to his class. Back in 2014, I had a system that I decided I wanted to get built, which was a geofenced coupon delivery system where you had a mobile app on your phone and it used your phone's location and sent you a coupon when you got to the front door of the business. And so when Barry invited me in 2014, he had 47 students in the class. And so I sneakily thought, well, let's see if I can get most of the UML design done for the system. So I said, hey, would you like me to grade a couple of UML homework assignments for you? And he said, sure, because grading UML homework for 47 students is a bit of work. And so we basically took this system on, and we took it on in a way where I partitioned the system into 1 use case per student, and we let the students work independently in parallel. And somewhat by accident, we ran it through this prototype at first, do sort of a model view controller decomposition for each use case, and then optimize it. And we realized probably somewhere around 2016 that what we were actually doing was applying the spiral model in parallel, where each use case could independently go through its own little spiral of proof of concept, minimum viable product, and optimize. And we'd have large teams of developers working in parallel. We ran the cost numbers, the effort numbers on the student labor, and the results sort of astounded us. And it was our expectation when we started this that all we would get was some UML models and not really any working code. And if we did get much working code, it wouldn't integrate together. And then we put it together and it actually integrated. We said, we're kind of onto something here. And so that was the genesis of the Parallel Agile book. So it took a few years to to sort of coalesce all of this into a book. Happily, the book got published this spring. There's a link to the Amazon page in the Teams window I put up there a few minutes ago. But one of the things we realized when we were writing the book was that most organizations are not staffed for large team parallel development, because for decades, everyone's been saying you can't do Agile with big teams. And so here we were adopting an Agile project management strategy for large teams, but we figured this is not going to get so much traction in industry if we don't also tell people how to do it with the kind of the Scrum teams that they already have in place. So I recruited my friend Chuck Suschek, who's one of the Scrum.org gurus, I guess, and also someone that I worked with at Iconics years and years ago. And I got Chuck to write chapter 5 of the Parallel Agile book, and so most of what you're going to see over the next 45 minutes or so is basically taken out of that chapter. And the idea here is that Scrum and Parallel Agile are a little bit different in that Scrum fixes your team size at 6 to 8 or 6 to 10 people. In a Scrum team, Parallel Agile lets you add in as many developers as you like. And by flexing the team size and allowing large teams to work together, you can actually get your projects done much quicker than you can do it with a small team. So when Chuck and I started to write this chapter, I thought the first thing we need to do is define our terminology, and I like to do that on domain models. So we did this simple domain model for backlog management. You essentially have a product backlog and a sprint backlog. The product backlog is everything that you want to build in the system that you're working on. And the sprint backlog in Scrum is what you're going to do in the next 2 weeks. In Parallel Agile, we do a sprint plan for a little bit longer time increment, and it's not fixed in Parallel Agile. You can pick what you like, but we've had good luck working with 1 month sprints. And the whole idea of what's in these backlogs is basically user stories. The user stories are split into tasks, and the user stories are organized into epics. So an epic is sort of like a subsystem. And if we move this ahead a little bit, Scrum has a very complex, in my estimation anyway, management structure built around these short sprints. So you have different roles. You have product owners and Scrum masters and developers and stakeholders. And every 2 weeks, they go through sprint planning and sprint retrospective and backlog refinement and all this stuff, which is really management and not technical development. And what I've seen happen in organizations that have adopted Agile is that they spend so much time on the Agile project management that sometimes they skip the technical design. Not everyone, but a lot of companies do. One of my favorite quotes about Agile in general is that this was from a guy I worked with on a consulting job, and he was trying to explain Agile to our department manager, and he said, Agile's great if you do it right, but most people do it wrong. And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of people who are doing Agile wrong make is they skip all the UML modeling and the UML design and the use cases. So with Parallel Agile, we're trying to address that. And so actually it was at that consulting job, I was working for a big satellite TV company on a contract basis. This was sort of about when we were discovering all of this parallelism stuff at USC. And in Barry's class, I was working on a consulting gig. And one day, so they were redesigning the whole user interface for their set-top box on their satellite TV system. And one day, the Scrum Master walked into my office because he was across the hall from me. And he had this really confusing diagram that he had copied off the whiteboard in one of their sprint planning meetings. And he says, so you seem to be pretty good with boxes and arrows. Can you help me make some sense out of this? And I looked at it and I couldn't figure out what the semantics of this diagram was. There was no, boxes and ovals were used interchangeably, and nouns and verbs were used interchangeably. And I scratched my head for a while, and I went on Google and I found someone who had developed a UML profile for EA for doing Scrum. And the UML profile had basically user stories and tasks, and they were organized into epics. And so I downloaded this profile and put it into EA and tried to redraw what he had given me. And I said, are you looking for something like this? And he said, yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. And so I started using this sprint plan diagram, not only at my consulting job, but I started using it to organize the work on the student projects we were doing at USC. And so when we got to making a business out of Parallel Agile and developed an add-in for Enterprise Architect, we put this UML profile for Scrum into our add-in just to make sure everybody had it. And then we started playing around with, once we've made these sprint plans, how can we take it from there onto EA Kanban boards? And once we've done that, can't we actually just export them into Jira as Jira tickets? And so that's what today's talk is largely about. We're going to use, as an example, a real project that I'm working on. It's a game project that we decided to build at USC. We actually built 3 or 4 test projects before we started writing the book, just to make sure we knew what we were doing when we started writing and had some experience base. First thing I can tell you is that if you decide you like this UML profile for Scrum, you can get it for free. Our Parallel Agile Add-In is absolutely free. The link to download it is there. I also put it in the Teams room. And so there's a couple things in this add-in that are interesting. One is the UML profile for Scrum. Another is we built a use case complexity analyzer because when you're trying to fit things into 1-month sprints and you're trying to assign one developer per use case, you need to know which of your use cases can't be done in a month. And so we built a complexity analyzer that looks at things like sequence diagrams and activity diagrams that are nested inside your use cases, and it lights them up in red, yellow, or green. So if it's a real complex use case, it lights up in red, and you have a chance to split it up before you assign the work to your team. And the other thing that our add-in does is it integrates with our code generator, which we call CodeBot. The CodeBot is not free. It's a $499 a year license. I'm talking about that tomorrow. That's not today's topic. But we built tight integration with EA into that, so you can basically right-click on a domain model and generate a working database in an API with a couple of clicks. So without further ado, here's the example that I'm going to show you. This is a real project that's going on now. I decided when we started doing test projects that there was no reason that we shouldn't have some fun excuse me, with our test projects. And so one of the test projects we built was a virtual reality, augmented reality game. We designed the whole thing with Enterprise Architect. So complete set of use cases, domain model view controller decompositions for the use cases. It's built in Unity 3D. And for the back end, we use what the CodeBot generates, which is a Mongo database with a Node.js API in front of it. So we generated our database access API from the domain model. And we actually, after going through 3 or 4 of these optimization sprints, we published it in January of this year. So it's a whopping 99 cents if you want to blow up Tiki Man in Hawaii with lava fireballs. You can go get it either on Google Play or on the App Store. And we decided to publish it with virtual reality first because augmented reality was one of those things that was taking us more than a month worth of sprint time to build. So the sprint plan I'm going to show you is actually from the epic called Augmented Reality. And so this is a sprint plan that's done with our EA add-in. And when you do augmented reality, you basically have to find your way to a location where there's enemies. And so we have a map-based interface for that. And then you're going to fight a battle in augmented reality mode, which is live camera background instead of a 360-degree spherical photo, which is in the VR background. And so the green boxes on here are the user stories. So as a user, I need to be able to find out where the enemies are. That's the navigate to the battle scene. And as a user, I want my augmented reality battle scene to work just the same, as close as I can get it to my virtual reality battle scene. And then we started assigning developers to various tasks. So the tasks are the yellow boxes under this. So I need a map page, that's one task. My map page needs to read locations from the database, that's another task. I need to detect where my enemies are located, and then I need to generate enemies and make them show up on the phone using a live camera background. And it turns out that when you do these sprint plan diagrams like this, EA lets you just drag and drop those user stories and tasks right onto Kanban boards, just right out of the box, because EA is cool like that. And it has a lot of nice drag and drop functionality. So I can just go to the EA project browser, drag my task, and I can organize this by, what's sort of waiting that's in the queue, what's in progress, what's in test, and what's done. So some of these things have migrated into the done column by now. And this is actually, we're sort of testing augmented reality kind of as we speak. And so these are some augmented reality Tiki Men showing up with live camera in my very messy living room, where we have a test battle scene location set up. Obviously, these look a lot better when you're in Hawaii on the beach, which is where the main augmented reality locations are set up. However, right now we're in a race because Hawaii is on lockdown, and we're trying to see if we can get the augmented reality stuff finished before I get a chance to go hop on a plane and go over to Hawaii to test it. So anyway, a couple of months ago, I worked with Scott Hebard, Sparx Systems. I want to thank Scott for helping me with this part of the presentation, but we decided to go ahead and try and push some of these tasks and user stories from the Kanban board down into Jira. Because in the real Agile world, everything is a Jira ticket. And I like to work in EA, so you know, Scott and I got together, and he helped me out with the Web EA and the Jira parts of this. And so we basically took this Kanban board, converted it from EA to Web EA, and then so you can see this looks just the same. Web EA is pretty cool. You can basically run EA in a web browser, and that's a very cool thing. And so then you can integrate to Jira with basically a right click, and they kind of turn into Jira tickets. At the time Scott and I did this webinar, we were having some kind of stereotype conflict. I'm not sure the exact status of that, but I think there was a difference in stereotype on the kind of tasks we were using and the kind of tasks that Jira is using. So we may still have to build a script to fully automate all of this to do a stereotype conversion. But basically, you can take these tasks from EA and push them down into Jira. And what's really cool is you can go add some tasks in Jira and then push them back into EA. So as you're testing and you find some bugs, and these are fictitious bugs actually, but we can track, like we've identified a bug that goes into the Jira tickets, and that can actually get pushed right back into EA and shown on the Kanban diagram. So one of the great things about Enterprise Architect is the open architecture and how easy it is to interface things together. You can use EA to glue all kinds of things together. And so this is a pretty cool one, because for people doing Agile development, in many cases, they are doing this on with Jira and with Jira tickets. So here is a Jira ticket that got pushed back onto our Kanban board. And so it's sort of, I guess, deceptively simple, because Sparx has done such a good job in building these interfaces between, I guess it's Pro Cloud Server and Jira. And that two-way interface is just really helpful to doing that. So looks like I am finishing way early here, but essentially, you know, to go back and talk about sort of the big picture again. We're really looking at, so I'll go back one more. When we talk about Agile Project Management hooked up to UML-driven design and use case-driven design, what we find is that in a lot of organizations, Agile is done wrong. And one of the things that makes it wrong is this tendency to skip the UML part of the design. And so in a lot of Agile organizations, and I've worked in a couple of them that are like this, they really aren't doing much UML modeling, just everything is a Jira ticket. And so we thought, why don't we bring some Agile project management capability into EA, which already has the UML part of it covered. And in that sense, we can kind of link together the project management capabilities with the technical design. And by linking together Agile project management and UML-driven design, we think we can get a lot closer to this cost minimum of and balancing feedback and planning. So just to kind of recap, the Parallel Agile Lifecycle is 3 phases. We do proof of concept, which is code first, that's prototype code. Then we do design, which is we actually go work all the use case driven design and do model view controller decompositions. We can use those model view controller decompositions, which if you're familiar with any of the iconic stuff that I've done, we sometimes call those robustness diagrams. In EA, I think they're called analysis diagrams. We built a use case complexity analyzer into our add-in that can read those use case decompositions, whether they be activity diagrams or sequence diagrams or robustness diagrams, and tell us which use cases are likely to not fit in a 1-month sprint. And then we can organize all this work on sprint plan diagrams, where we have user stories and tasks and epics. I will say that with small team Agile, people often get away with not doing these diagrams very formally. They just do whiteboard sketches and go. If you're trying to do large team Agile, which I would, large team Parallel Agile, which I would define as anything about 20 developers or above working in parallel, you really can't get away without doing this kind of diagram. You just need a little bit more formal organization of this. And then, one way that Agile projects typically attempt to scale is what they call scrum of scrums. So you might have multiple scrum teams. In that case, if you're working with multiple scrum teams, you would probably do 1 scrum team per epic. So that gets you fairly close to a Parallel Agile scalability paradigm, which is if you've organized your whole system into multiple epics. So an example of another one, another epic on the Tiki Man project right now is we published the game without 2 things. We decided to publish it without AR, and we decided to publish the first release without achievements. So achievements is something I'm learning all about gaming and game development now as we're working this project, but apparently gamers are very high on earning achievements and rewards. And so we got rewards into the first build of the game, but we didn't get achievements done yet. And so another epic on our split plan diagram, oops, sorry, going the wrong way. Another epic on the sprint plan diagram is achievements, and we have similar decompositions of user stories, tasks, and their epics. And in the case of achievements, we actually had to do some database modifications because the current database in the game is not set up with everything that we need to track achievements. And tomorrow's talk, we're going through using the CodeBot to redesign our database, which is actual work that's going on right now on this game, where we've updated our UML model to handle achievements. We have to track progress. We've regenerated the database API, and we're now updating the game with an upgraded database. So all the pieces fit together, the Agile Project Management and the technical design, and you can really access all of it using our free add-in for EA. It lets you kind of integrate all of this stuff together, and of course what glues it together is what we've described in the book. So I gave you a quick peek at chapter 5 of the book with all the Scrum and Kanban work. and a quick peek at the EA integration. Scott, thanks again. Hopefully you're out there. I think even though I'm early, I can probably take some questions here, as well as going over to the Teams session. I'll put a quick commercial for my talk tomorrow. Just about 24 hours from now, I'll be here talking about CodeBot UX. And I'll give you just a quick commercial for it right now. We started CodeBot with just doing database and API with one database, MongoDB, and using Node.js as the API. We've been working really hard on the CodeBot, and we're going to be introducing multiple databases, including Oracle and SQL Server and MySQL. And we also decided to take a crack at generating user interface code, generating screens from wireframes. And we've been using Parallel Agile to design the CodeBot as well. And I'm happy to report that it's going faster than we expected. And so we actually have both multiple database stuff and UI code generation from wireframes that we'll be able to show you tomorrow. And so I hope some of you come back for that talk. If there are questions, that's my email address. And I will also be hanging out in the Teams room for a while to see if anyone has questions there. So, Juhi, I can flip it back to you. If anyone's typed in any questions, I'm happy to take them here.
Yeah, a few questions. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Doug. Thanks for the session. There are a few questions which has been posted in Teams room, and you can have a look at that. And I think it may need some more detailed discussion. So it's better you take it from there. Is it okay for you?
Yeah, let me see if I can just get the Teams room showing on my main screen here. And maybe we can do both of these at once. So I see two questions.
Yeah.
So should I just address them here since we're still within time for the webinar? Or?
Yeah, you can address it here. You're always welcome. Yeah.
Okay. Because we're, so I guess I had too much coffee this morning. I finished early, but hopefully it's better than putting everyone to sleep with droning on indefinitely. First, let me show you that if you want a copy of the slides, I posted them here under Files. So if you'd like to download the PowerPoint slides, they are there. And then question, we're using Polarion on our side. Is it possible to integrate with Polarion instead of Jira? I actually don't know anything about Polarion, but we could certainly look into it. If there is a Sparx interface to it, then we could probably work with it. We haven't built in our add-in any of the Jira integration. We've been using basically the built-in functionality of EA for Kanban boards and what's built in ProCloud Server to interface to Jira. So I don't know if anyone here from Sparx or Collaborate, do you know, is there a Polarion integration that Sparx has?
Okay.
So yeah, so we could potentially build that integration directly into our add-in. I don't want to make that as an absolute promise right now, but if that's something that there seems to be general use for, then we can do it. You're welcome to, do we want to program that add-in? So I think it depends on market demand. If a lot of people are using Polarion and there's demand for it, then we can certainly consider doing it. Mario, if you'd like to email me, Mario or Matt, if you'd like to email me some info on Polarion, I'll certainly take that into consideration. Next question is the integration details on elements and stereotypes. The sprint plan really has, someone has answered the question.
Yeah, that's me, yeah.
Oh, okay. So apparently there is already a Polarion integration. And so that's good to know. The stereotypes we are using are simply epic, task, and user story. I think the issue we hit when Scott and I were doing the webinar is that there are multiple elements in EA that have a stereotype of task. And so, we may have to write a script to convert a sprint plan task to a different kind of task, but I don't think that's a very difficult problem. Next question, can we use detailed use case scenarios instead of user stories? Actually, we can use both. One of the really unfortunate naming things that happen with Agile development is that, when people like me were writing books on use case driven development, and then Agile came along, Agile decided to rename everything. And so they came up with this concept of a user story. And you would think that a user story is like a use case, but it's actually not. A user story is actually a requirement. It's a requirement written from a user perspective, okay? So if you're using use cases and doing UML models, and if you have requirements linked to your use cases, which is certainly how I like to do use cases, then the user stories are actually requirements, and they tend to start with, as a user, I need the system to do X, okay? And so it tells you what kind of user, right? So as a game player, I need the system to let me play in augmented reality mode because augmented reality is fun, okay? Those are really your requirements. So all the Agile project management stuff that uses user stories, all of this work, I can flip back here to this. If you look at the text of this, navigate to battle scene, it says, as a user, I need to be able to find where my enemies are hiding, okay, using a map. That's a requirement. So these requirements, the user stories, don't replace your use cases. You still need your use cases, and absolutely in Parallel Agile, you use both real use cases and requirements. And when I talked about Agile project management and use case driven design, the Agile project management part, these are requirements, but they're expressed as user stories. This is a real common misconception of people doing Agile development, is that they think they don't have to actually do use cases anymore. Absolutely wrong. In Parallel Agile, we completely do use cases, and we use formal use case driven development, and we decompose those into model view controller type designs. So Yes, use cases should be linked to user stories, absolutely. And the way you link a use case to a user story in EA, it's just like you link a requirement to your use case. You can drag and drop that requirement onto the use case description. And so, yeah, detail on how to do that is in the Parallel Agile book. And I'm glad you asked the question, because it's really one of the most unfortunate things about Agile nomenclature is they said, oh, don't do use cases. And you know, this goes back to when Agile was new. There was these debates that would go on the web. There was a forum called the Object Technology Users Group, and the Agile people kind of came in and took it over, and they said, you don't need use cases anymore, just do user stories. And user stories and use cases are in no way the same thing. User stories are requirements, and they're written from the user perspective. What the sprint plan does is it says, for this requirement, now I can break this down into tasks. And not everything on a sprint plan is going to be a step in your use case. And so if I go back here again, so in this case, I need to make a map page. Yeah, that's going to be a development task, okay? It's not a step in my, I apologize for my email. It's not a step in my use case to go make this map plan. It's a development task, okay? So these are really your development tasks organized by requirement, okay? And so you need all of it. You need the project management stuff and the requirements linked to the UML technical design. And EA is the perfect tool to do this, because EA handles the UML technical design work, and it handles, with our add-in, the Agile Project Management work. And with the ProCloud Server integration, it lets you push all that down to Jira, okay? Which is what the guys in the Scrum room are probably using, okay? And we built this use case complexity analyzer so that if you're doing real use case driven development, and you need to, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to look into your EA model with a script and say, show me which of my use cases is very complex, and I'm going to have trouble fitting it into a 1 month time increment. And that's why we built the use case complexity analyzer. So it really does all fit together. So that's kind of how that works. The mechanism for, so you use ProCloud Server to export issues to Jira. How do you export traces between elements? I'm not 100% certain of that, but I would say you may have some of those traces between elements in your sprint plan. Does Jira support diagrams in tickets? Again, I'm not a Jira expert, but you can certainly export a diagram, like a sequence diagram, from EA as an image, and I'm sure that you can add images into your Jira and Confluence tickets. The other thing you can do is, and I use this all the time, is I use the EA web publishing, export my package to HTML, and you can actually use links in your, to point to specific pages in your EA model, like a specific diagram, as a link that can go into the Jira ticket. Yeah, you can put images in tickets, that's correct. You can also put hyperlinks in tickets, so you can hyperlink directly to a specific page in your EA model. Those seem to be too big development tasks, so you divide it further down. They can be. Those are the actual ones that we use. You know, what we would do with a development ticket like this, for example, design a map page, is then hand that to a developer, and they can go through and do a whole UML design on developing that map page. Certainly, generating enemies is, I can tell you, it's a pretty complex piece of work that took developers quite some amount of time to get that to work. So yeah, this isn't the whole sprint plan. As you can see, these tasks go farther down the screen. You can make these tasks at whatever level of atomicity, I guess would be the word that you like. So you can make those tasks as granular as you need to. So developers are using EA for UML modeling. My developers do. I think developers should be using EA for UML modeling. I think one of the big problems with Agile development right now is it's the old thing when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So a lot of Scrum teams only use Jira. That's like, yeah, we do all of this backlog management and user story management and sprint retrospectives and all this stuff, and you know, all the sprint planning meetings and retrospectives I sat in say, yeah, you know, we could have done a better our last sprint would have gone better if we would have done a little bit more design, you know, on our sprint, but we didn't do that. And one of the reasons they don't do it is because the only tool that a lot of organizations are using is Confluence and Jira. So everything looks like a Jira ticket, and the UML design sometimes gets skipped. And so what we're saying is, no, don't skip your UML design. Move your Agile Project Management into your UML design tool, and then you can actually do a good job and manage your sprints, and manage your UML design, and manage your requirements all in the same place. And then, you know, I look at it more as I do almost everything in EA, and I push stuff down to Jira because I know they're using Jira in the Scrum room. When I started working on the webinar with Scott, he's like, yeah, you know, it's pretty cool because you can actually change stuff in Jira and push it back into EA. You know, and that's even better, right? Because now you have a two-way interface between Jira and EA. So yeah, user stories don't replace use cases. Absolutely right. It is one of the biggest misconceptions of Agile development. And if you go back to my coworker who said it was a guy named Daniel Litvak, I give him credit. We're sitting in our department meeting at DirecTV, and our department manager says, "What's all this Agile stuff about?" Daniel says, "Agile's great if you do it right, but almost everybody does it wrong." And I'm like, "Yep, that's correct." And this one that you've put, Elena, that user stories don't replace your use cases. 99% don't understand this. That's why most people get Agile wrong, is that they're not enough people doing Agile development are using EA and using Agile Project Management. And what we're hoping with Parallel Agile is that by, number one, adding Agile Project Management into EA, we're hoping to address that. And with tomorrow's talk, if you're able to join us for CodeBot, what you're going to see is that we can actually automate huge amounts of software development and get stuff done way, way, way faster if you are modeling, if you're doing domain models and you're doing wireframes, and you're doing state machines, the most exciting thing we're working on right now is state machine code generation to glue together screens. And we're actually able to, with Code.ux, we're able to generate complete working applications that come up and run with no manual coding at all. It's kind of shocking. And so, yeah, we're pretty excited. G.A. Jones, I'm going to guess you might be Greg. If that's you, Greg, I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Another question has shown up when we talk about use cases and user stories being distinct. Is it a many-to-many relationship between them? Yes, it is. Sometimes you have a use case satisfying a single requirement. Sometimes you have multiple requirements mapped to a single use case. For example, in the if I go back here to our model here, navigate to battle scene is one use case, but it kind of satisfies that user story. Fight battle in AR mode, that one happens to map pretty cleanly as well from one user story per one requirement. But you could think of these tasks in some cases as sub-requirements. So if you think, a requirement, a child requirement of navigate to battle scene is enable map navigation, then both of those requirements are going to be lumped under that use case. So what you do inside a use case and what you do inside a user story are different. Inside a requirement might be a task called spin up a new AWS server. Okay, that doesn't appear in my use case description at all, but it's a requirement. Someone has to do that to make that use case work. So let's see, are we out of time yet? We got 3 minutes left. So I think we managed to fill up the hour. I encourage everyone to go download our free add-in, try it, and I hope to see some of you tomorrow at the Code.ux presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Thanks for the wonderful session. It's very interactive. So yeah, thank you so much. We'll wind down the session over here. Yeah. So
I just want to once again
please.
My appreciation to you and Nizam and the whole Collaborate team. I think, Sparx events that feature partners and some of the stuff that we're doing to extend the capabilities of EA are hugely helpful. And I just really, really want to thank you for putting this event together.
Yeah, thank you. Our pleasure. Thank you. We also felt really pleased to bring all EA practitioners to a single stage. I think it's one of the great achievement we've made to bring all EA practitioners to meet each other. So yeah, thanks, Doug. Thanks for the wonderful session.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone once again for joining the session. As I said before, the video of the entire session, entire presentation will be made available online after the summit, and we will be notifying each and every participant about where it will be available. So please join this team and continue the conversation with Doug and his team to continue to take forward with the conversation. Thanks everyone.
I'll hang out for a while on Teams.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bye.